So I'd like to introduce our moderator for the next panel. His name is Ron Kaltenbaugh. He was a member of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Work Group and has continued to volunteer with Mobilize Frederick. He's been a great resource on electrification, alternative energy, electric vehicles. So Ron has volunteered for a number of different community organizations. He's been a great resource in the county. So for anybody who's interested in solar or electric vehicles, if you have any questions, you can seek out Ron because he's a wealth of information. He also served on the Frederick County Sustainability Commission for 2 terms, and he's recently been appointed to the Maryland Zero Emission Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council. So I wanted to make sure I read that so I got that whole name correctly. So please welcome Ron, and he's going to introduce the rest of the panelists for this last session. So we'll get going. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I was talking to Joel beforehand. This is a tough act to follow, following all those inspiring kids. So we're going to go from that to talking about building energy performance standards. So we have a panel with 3 folks on there. And our first, I'll talk about introduce each person as they about to talk. Our first panelist is Joel Rensberger, who you've been up here before. Joel has a bachelor's degree in government and politics with a minor in Afro-American studies from the University of Maryland at College Park. Joel interned for a home builder and immediately fell back in love with his family business of home building. He's the owner of C. Rensberger and Family Builders based in Woodsboro, president of the Woodsboro Historical Society, board member of Frederick County Builders Association, vice president of Mobilize Frederick, and chairman of the Frederick County Planning Commission. Joel is a lifelong Frederick County resident. His family are Swiss German immigrants and arrived in Frederick in the 1730s, so he has a long history with Frederick County. So Joel, welcome, and we look forward to your talk.
Good morning again, everybody. To put that immigrant story in context, about 20 years after our family arrived, General Braddock took a unit of the British Army over South Mountain, paused for a moment, and then headed on to into the Ohio River Valley. That point is now called Braddock Heights. And there was a young British officer in his detachment, George Washington. And it was the beginning of the French and Indian War. About 10 years after that, Middletown was founded. Good morning again. BEPS, Building Energy Performance Standards. I have to correct a small mistake that was made yesterday. This is draft legislation. It isn't passed yet. And this is not building code. This is existing building stock building management. Warning, if you hear me make the sound during my presentation, that's Pinocchio from Shrek when it's, I'm really not sure if you're supposed to be doing that. That's just me wondering if something's suspicious. So the BEPS, it's going to apply to any building over 35,000 square feet. Where's the clicker? Across the state, it's happening elsewhere in the nation. It's the result of the Climate Solutions Now Act that was passed in 2022, and the intent is to decarbonize buildings. But there's an interesting approach that they're taking. It's the first to my knowledge. The draft law measures 2 things: energy use intensity, so how much is your building sucking off the grid, and then your greenhouse gas emissions at the property address. So they're measuring both sides. Building owners will be required to measure and report that data to MDE, Maryland Department of the Environment. They'll be using an Energy Star platform that the federal government established some time ago, so that's good. These buildings are located all over the state. Note the concentrations in Baltimore, Hagerstown, Montgomery County, and to some extent Frederick. More on that later. The goals are to promote electrification, minimize impacts on the grid, and achieve Maryland's goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. This law, if passed, will require the utilities to keep and report records as well and submit them to Maryland Department of the Environment. This, to my read, is a back check on building owners and their reporting. The distribution of affected buildings you can see on this slide. Warehouses, office buildings, and multifamily housing and retail establishments, malls, make up the majority. Building owners and developers will and must stay current, and current builders will have to be mindful that as soon as they complete that project, their building then drops into existing stock and is covered by the BEPS. So planning for new construction needs to take this into account. A building over 35,000 square feet, even if new, I already mentioned that. Incremental milestones are being set that begin to take effect in 2025. Again, this program is designed 2025, reach the goal by 2045. There are exempted buildings, historic buildings, which I understand, but they're probably the worst offenders. K-12 schools, I don't know why they would be exempted. Manufacturing, agricultural buildings are exempted. That makes sense to me. The cost of food, anything you do to them, will all end up paying more for food. And federal buildings, oddly, are exempted. That's another. So the covered buildings that you saw on slide 3, they number about 9,000 in our state. Utilities are to report the quantity of energy delivered to the building, as I mentioned, and categorize it, whether it's electricity, gas, propane, diesel, or some other sort of fuel. Tenant users will need to report their consumption to the landlords, because and then the landlord reports it. The promise of this draft legislation is to cut demand for energy and clean up the byproducts of what must still be consumed on site, those greenhouse gases I mentioned. The federal, I think it's an EPA report, Department of Energy, sorry, is where this data comes from. The Department of Energy modeled both scenarios, and you can see the effectiveness of this bifurcated legislation. Building owners who fail to meet these incremental goals will be fined. The U.S. Department of Energy reports that between 2025 and 2040, building owners will have to invest about $15 billion in these upgrades, and that those same owners will save about $9 billion in operating costs. The same U.S. Department of Energy report says that by 2050, they will have reached the inversion point, where owners begin to experience net savings. And that isn't new to most folks in this room, that investment now, eventually it pays off, right? Well, where that inversion point occurs is 2050. Legislation has to be zero by 2045, but it's going to cost $6 billion, 15 minus 9. Building owners will have to find $6 billion between now and 2040 to stay current. The other concern is that there are vacant buildings generating no income for their landlords, or for their owners. So if you've ever owned or operated a business, it becomes immediately apparent that there's a potential victim class out there that is not yet being wholly addressed by this draft legislation. To the second question first, the $6 billion in conversion costs prior to that inversion point, There is talk of utilizing the IRA to help make up this gap, not the Irish Republican Army, the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't know if those funds will still be there, but that's the goal, and they're talking about it. But I haven't been able to find a solution for the vacant buildings. And as we all know, the economy has changed. Someone mentioned Amazon earlier this morning. Drive through Baltimore, Hagerstown, Cumberland. There's a lot of these vacancies. Many of these owners can't even afford to paint their buildings, and they sort of lay in waste. If the penalty regime kicks in, one of our concerns is what sort of death spiral or downward trend does that cause on an already burdened vacant building population? However, Frederick County and City are blessed again, this time by our economy and our people and our opportunity. We don't have many of those problematic buildings in this county, but it's something the state is going to have to address. Thank you very much. Go Frederick, go Woodsboro.
Thanks, Joel. Our next panelist is Ruth Ann Norton. Ruth Ann is president and CEO of the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative and one of the nation's foremost authorities on healthy housing and its impact on the social determinants of health. Ms. Norton directs GHHI's national strategy to integrate climate, healthcare, and healthy housing as a platform for improved health, economic, educational, and social outcomes in historically disinvested communities. She'll be leading GHHI's Thriving Communities grant-making program for EPA Region 3 for funding environmental justice projects across the Mid-Atlantic. Ms. Norton serves as a member of the Maryland Clean Energy Center Board of Directors, on EPA's Children's Health Protection Advisory Committee, and as a member of the National Leadership Academy for the Public Health and the Alpha Environmental Leadership Network. Welcome.
Morning, everybody. How are you? Hey, listen, I want to thank Mobilize Frederick and Hood College, where I've never been, which is great, and that's a gift. But there are really surprising and amazing things at the end of a long week where I was in Chicago, Detroit, Providence, got to come home last night. So my dog and I drove out here today, and I didn't know I was going to get the greatest gift, which was to reconnect with Kathy Kinsey, my old friend from the Maryland Department of the Environment. When we were working on one of the most historic pieces of public health practice that has happened in the nation, which is because of Kathy's leadership and so many others, Maryland has reduced its lead poisoning rate by 99.4%, returning $44.5 billion back to the Maryland economy and ensuring that kids get in the classroom healthy and ready to learn. So please give her a round of applause. So how do I do this here? Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about GHHI. And normally people can hear me without a microphone, so you can hear me if I back away a little bit. Good. So the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, which was founded on the work of 9 parents whose kids were lead poisoned in Baltimore, today has grown into the largest and I think most impactful and influential organization in the country working at the intersection of climate, health, and housing. We work from California to Detroit to Providence to Memphis to Jackson, Mississippi to Baltimore. And all of it is on the premise of improving the social determinants of health, opportunity, and equity by improving the standards of housing and the environmental health impacts in housing. So why am I at a climate forum? Because we are helping to lead the charge around the climate investments that we can make in this country as not only restorative justice to our most disenfranchised communities and disinvested communities, but that we can improve the health of all Americans by reducing carbon emissions, improving the electrification as part of a standard of healthy housing that we are starting to help to move with you. If you're interested and you can't sleep on a Saturday night, I'll recommend these publications that we have put out about why we should invest in climate dollars in housing. And $12 billion of the greenhouse gas emission dollars are going to go to historically disinvested communities, much of that to residential housing and buildings. And so we are helping to lead the charge here in Maryland on a zero emission heating standard and appliance standard, which has been put into our Climate Pathways report, MDE's Climate Pathways report. I served as the co-chair of Governor Moore's Housing Transition Committee and have been working also in that aspect to ensure that we base all of our housing investments in the health of all of us, that we can ensure that older adults age in place with health and dignity, but also that we allow lower income homeowners to be able to do something that most of us take for granted, which is intergenerational wealth transfer, closing the appraisal gaps while improving health. But the stuff that keeps me up at night, keeps all of us up at night at GHHI, is the intersection of these health impacts in housing. So all that we're going to do to decarbonize housing and electrify housing will also require us to address those health issues in housing, whether it's a leaky roof or pest management issues or poor foundations or lead-based paint. All of those issues deter and defer and cause declination in applications to do things like decarbonization and electrification. And the flip side of that, if you have an older home that may have lead paint somewhere, all of the greenhouse gas work that we're going to do is going to disturb that underlying lead-based paint and other asthmagens and allergens that are in the home. So we're working on solutions to make sure that we do this in a whole house approach so that we can actually save government over $150 billion a year in cost, and instead do the improvements that we want to do. And many of us have also talked about our commitments to racial equity, to equity for our lower income communities, and we have to remember that the work is deep and the investments are deep, and we have to make sure that the investments that are being made in the federal government today don't pass over rural communities, don't pass over low-income communities, don't pass over communities of color that have been disinvested or haven't had the access, because the energy impacts and the health impacts in the housing stock in communities has overwhelmed people with cost and disinvestment over time. So the way we approach this here in Maryland and around the country is to align and braid and coordinate the efforts to not depend solely on government, but one of the things that our organization also does is does the health analysis, the patient record analysis for big Medicaid programs, for institutions like Hopkins and others, is to look at our health improvements when we do these things. So when we reduce gas emissions, we are improving respiratory disease, we are improving brain health, we're improving cardiac health. That also happens to be the same when we address lead-based paint or we address indoor air quality in doing this work. So we are aligning these programs and working with DOE and HUD and other agencies to do this at the federal, state, and local level, and to have a whole house approach that when we go to do this work, whether it's single family or multifamily housing, that we look at the health of residents and the health of the structure together, and with really driven by common sense, do what is necessary so that when we walk away from the investment that we've made, it's sustainable over generations. If we don't fix a leaky roof, for example, we cannot electrify a home. We can't do the replacement of carbon-emitting appliances if we're not taking care of the other issues we may disturb, like lead-based paint or asbestos. We have to do this together. And the good news is it makes sense. It saves about 26% to do that when government does this in an aligned fashion. And we have enormous outcomes when we have this kind of whole home approach, from the assessment to the clearance of what we do. What we know in this, as we look at these, as we kind of look at what is the non-energy benefits, from the studies that we have conducted for the federal government, we lower hospitalizations by 66%, saving Medicaid dollars, saving healthcare dollars, and we reinvest those dollars like we've done in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where we sit in the hospital to do this reinvestment, and they invested $50 million. We can get that private sector investment by taking these things together. So this whole house approach helps us to do this. This is one study that we did in Baltimore. I want to point out one thing that I think is really important here. In Baltimore, but this also happens in Shelby County, Tennessee, right? Wayne County, Michigan. We have taken kids who are chronically missing school for asthma and turned their 20-day-a-year absenteeism into perfect attendance 62% of the time. We've improved workforce attendance by 88%, and we've returned millions back in healthcare dollars. So we can talk a lot about this, right? And one of the reasons that, you know, we are coming after people's gas stoves, their gas heating appliances, is that we know it impacts health. We know it impacts our overall cost. We know long-term that it's not just asthma, it's brain health, it's cardiac health, it's reproductive health. So let me stop there and only just tell you that we are moving this forward. Recently just got the Buildings Up Prize from DOE, and we will be running the Thriving Communities $50 million re-granting program for environmental justice and equity and environment. So I'd love to talk to you about that, but we're improving lives like Corliss Billups here, who never thought she'd be off gas and today is helping to lead a community charge in Baltimore. So look forward to talking with you. I am out of time, and we can talk about Empower too when we're done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth Ann. That was great. So our last panelist is Ernesto Villasenor. He is a CCAN policy manager, and based on firsthand experience, understands the effects of injustice, inspiring to dedicate himself to the cause of social justice. Ernesto has experience in community organizing and legislative advocacy, including work on behalf of California farm workers, advocating for reproductive justice rights, and assisting the most vulnerable of Skid Row with essential services. During law school, he explored the impact of an environmental rights amendment in Maryland and the implications of climate change and extreme heat on poverty law. Ernesto received his law degree from University of Baltimore School of Law. He also holds a BS in Sustainable Studies with a minor in Economics from Rensberger Polytechnic Institute. Ernesto, welcome.
Good morning, all. First and foremost, again, my name is Ernesto. I'm the policy manager with Chesapeake Climate Action Network, CCAN. Thank you all for having me. One of the things that I'm definitely going to start talking about is, all right, electrification, how can we do it for ourselves? But before I get into that, I want to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, this happened, it's about to hit its 2-year mark. This was under President Biden, and this was a continuation of climate and environmental legislation that's been on the works since he became president and even beforehand. So the Inflation Reduction Act has been the largest federal law implemented in the United States history. And when I'm talking about largest, I'm talking about $738 billion into climate, energy, and the environment. And not only that, it's the law was implemented to curb inflation by reducing the deficit, which at that time the CBO didn't even anticipate that to be the case, but there are stats and information showing that it has been reducing the deficit. Also reducing prescription drug prices, which we know is insanely expensive and has gotten more expensive. And there's still legislation being done on reducing that as a carryover from the Inflation Reduction Act. And then also not a 15% corporate tax credit, but a 15% corporate tax increase to generate revenue. Why do we want to give corporations tax credits? So the great thing about the Inflation Reduction Act is that from the $738 billion, it has about $370 billion over the next 10 years with tax credits and tax rebates for consumers. In terms of, as you're thinking about electrifying your home, there's a lot of tax credits and tax rebates information on there. 214 in clean energy tax incentives, $60 billion for community and environmental justice funding through EPA-funded grants, $33 billion to electrify public schools and public school and transportation. So when you're hearing about electrifying school buses, this funding comes from the Inflation Reduction Act. $2.6 billion to conserve coastal habitats. The Chesapeake Bay is the most beautiful bay, and we need to protect it at all costs. And we need to get some of this funding. And $9 billion to electrify our appliances. So that's what the IRA has. And one of the things when we think about electrification, there are tax credits and tax rebates, and I'll go into this. I do want to put in a plug on Rewiring America. And this is something that you all could do at home. Type in Rewiring America IRA calculator. And the great thing about it is that it takes your household size, what tax filing status it is, whether you're a renter or a homeowner, how much your income is, and your zip code. And it gives you all the tax credits that you're able to qualify for, the tax rebates, what technology you want to implement in your place, how much it would cost, how much you could get back, all of that good stuff. So I do want to put a plug on the Rewiring America calculator, and we'll play with it in a bit. So I just want to put a plug on that. With the IRA for the tax credits that we qualify as consumers, there's two major tax credits that you all could be applying for. There's a residential clean energy tax credit, which is line 25D, and the energy efficient home improvement credit. 25D covers projects that make residential energy more efficient. So if you're looking at upgrading your electric panel because you want to implement solar panels, that's something you could qualify for, and you could get an up to 30% uncapped, 30% tax credit. 25C, if you're looking at weatherizing your home, if you're trying to get someone to do like an energy, just going to your house and just checking to see how efficient your electric panel is, whether you should install solar panels, whether you need to do weatherization, you get a up to $600 and also a 30% tax credit. The other thing that I also want to talk about is the rebates. There's two rebates, two large rebates. So there's a high efficiency electric home rebate program and the homeowner managing energy savings or the HOMES program. These two rebates, which you all could qualify for and apply for now, covers energy efficient appliances. So if you're thinking of getting an energy efficient washer or dryer, you could get a rebate for that. If you're thinking, especially as we're considering shifting away from gas stoves to electric stoves, the HEEHRA program rebate allows you to get up to an $840 tax rebate for an induction stove if that's something you're considering on doing anytime soon. If you qualify as a low-income individual, which is census-specific information, and the Rewiring America calculator helps you find that for you, you could get the entire $840 back. Or if you're of moderate income, you get 50% of that back. So let's say an induction stove costs $1,000 and you're moderate income, you get about $370 back from that $1,000 electric stove. If you're thinking about getting a heat pump water heater, there is up to $1,750 rebate. If you're low income, you get that whole $1,750. If you're moderate income, you get half of that. I think you kind of know where I'm going with the numbers. If you're thinking of getting an electric panel under the homes program, it covers up to $4,000 for low income, half of that, up to $2,000 if you're moderate income. As you're thinking of electrifying, rewiring your house gets pretty expensive. You could get up to $2,500 if you're 100% low income, half of that if you're moderate income. And then weatherization, windows, doors, you get up to $800 for moderate income, up to $1,600 if you're 100% low income. I did want to say that we're going to play with the Rewiring America calculator just to give you more specifics on those rebates and those credits. So I'm just going to ask some questions right now. Anybody want to give me a household income? Don't be shy. It's just a factual number. Doesn't have to be yours. Nobody? 150. All right, cool. 150,000. Household size, anybody? Any number? 4. All right, let's do 4. Zip code? 21701. So if you put, and as a homeowner, if you're, let's say, married, filing separately, household of 4, household income 150, zip code 21701. This is what you could get right now in terms of tax credits and tax rebates for electrifying your home. Up to $14,000, upfront discounts, around $24,000 in tax credits. You're saving around $1,600 in energy savings per year, with the total incentives of around $38,000. And this is just if you wanted to electrify your home right now. If you're thinking of getting a heat pump air conditioner or a heat pump heater, you get up to $8,000. Like I said, electric panel up to $4,000. Other efficiency rebates, $4,000. Electrical wiring, up to $2,500. A water heater. The great thing about this savings calculator is, let's say we're looking at a heat pump air conditioner heater. It explains what the heat pump air conditioner heater is, the lifespan, and it breaks down your the upfront discount, the incentives, and the costs. And it gives you the amount that you get and the tax credit. So it's capped at $2,000 per year. You get up to 30% of that total amount that it costs. And like I mentioned earlier, when you're doing your taxes for 2024 and 2025, it's on line 25C where you file that. The great thing about the Rewiring America calculator is that if you go, it's very personalized. If you click make a plan, it asks you more specific questions for yourselves, and it gives you a personalized plan based on your house, based on your zip code, based on your on that specific income that you put. I think that's, so yeah, that's kind of like the larger thing when you're thinking about electrifying your home and electrification, especially as consumers. Those are the major credits and major tax credits and rebates that are available. There are other things that were, and this is just federal tax credits and tax rebates. Maryland has and is currently working on expanding these credits. One of the things that we're working with legislators in Annapolis is adding more upfront discounts and immediate tax rebates for a lot of these appliances and purchases that consumers are looking at exploring. So we are working on legislation to kind of get that happening much more sooner and have a more immediate impact. And the other thing that we're also working on when we're thinking about better buildings is looking at new homes and new buildings that are being built in Maryland to be electrification or electric ready, in terms of making it easier if you have an electric vehicle where you don't have to buy or add additional equipment to the building. So making it easier and shifting away from gas, from natural gas on homes. So that's just some of the information that I have, some of the legislation that we're working on, and I think I might have gone beyond the 10 minutes that I had. So thank you all so much. And I'll leave the Rewiring America website up.
Thank you, Ernesto, and thanks to everyone on the panel. Yeah, Rewire America is a great resource. They've got lots of things here on the calculator. They've got things around just background information on electrification, and they are really doing a great job. And a lot of the folks behind this website were involved in a lot of the technical things around the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the things that got passed in the last Congress. So they are definitely a resource to use in lots of ways. We have the microphones are out there for people who have questions in the audience, but we'll start with the panel. Joel, you and I were talking yesterday about the renewable energy percentages and BEPS and how there's some interaction there. You wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. So in don't quote me, 2035, somewhere in the 30s, Frederick County is by law has to generate 14% of its own power through renewable resources, and that's a good thing. But when compared to the prospect of data centers entering the county, I'll give you some numbers that I do know. 32 pad sites at East Alco. Once built out, those data centers will consume more electricity than Frederick County, all of Frederick County consumes today. So that then, if you can imagine, that site will probably be built out in the next 10 years. That means that Frederick County will struggle. I'm not saying data centers are a bad thing, but in this regard, it will make that 14% mandate even more unattainable unless the data centers are covered by BEPS. Then they'll be mitigating it for themselves. But I don't see that in the draft legislation so far.
Interesting. Let's take a question from the audience.
Yeah, hi. So first off, I just want to say this is a really great panel, especially with the regard for equity and how health plays out with housing. So I'm a renter, and I have a gas stove. And my whole house smells like gas whenever I use it. The gas company came out, they did a reading, they said it was at 300 ppm. And they said that was a spike, and it would probably go back down to 180, which was their standard of health. That's not safe. And so I think one of the things that I'm really curious about when we talk about equity is most of the people most impacted are renters. And I'm really curious to see, are there any solutions that you guys are seeing around renter equity in all of this work? And making those things more accessible, or is it really just like, do you have a good landlord? Thanks.
I'll comment, and then we'll turn it over to others. So one thing you can do as a renter is you can get actually single or dual burner induction burners that you can get and put on your countertop and use your gas stove less. And those are not very expensive. They're not as high powered as getting a built-in induction stove, but they are a solution that can help somewhat. But the challenge is, though, that the gas stove is still there and it's still polluting even when you're not using it, but you would be using it less. I'm looking forward to you guys to think about thoughts on how you would deal this for renters. Ernesto?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. Also too, as a renter, it's something that I have dealt with. It's one of those, I don't want to say like good luck with maybe your landlord could help you out, but one of the things that the Inflation Reduction Act, tax rebates and tax credits, is that as a renter you qualify for these. One of the things that the Maryland legislation is pushing towards doing is making it more accessible, so providing more state rebates and credits on top of those federal credits to make it so that you could switch out and going into electrification. I don't know of any specific programs within Frederick or Maryland altogether that could kind of, all right, if you're thinking of switching from gas to electric stove to address that, just making it accessible so you don't have to pay up front as a renter. But it is something that we are talking with legislators on. I know I've spoken with the House Chair, Chair Wilson, about this, just to see, because I let him know, like, as a renter, I cannot afford to just buy an electric stove, like, yeah, I could fork out $1,000, but then it's not great having an electric stove if I don't have groceries to cook on it. But there are rebates and credits available that you could qualify as a renter, but we are we are further exploring more programs to just kind of help out with that upfront cost so that you don't have to pay out of pocket.
So a couple of things that are happening with the Department of Housing and Community Development is to set a set of renters' rights around health and carbon emissions. So I'm happy to follow up with you further. And we're starting to lead that effort in Maryland. As Kathy knows, we led the effort on lead. From a health standpoint, we're starting to do this. As renters, we're not looking for you to be replacing your stoves or your gas emission appliances, right? And so one, we have a whole team that will help you talk to your owner about how they can do the replacement on that. Secondly, I will say it's not just the carbon monoxide that we care about, right? It's not the nitrous oxide and the benzene. And benzene is the most underrated impact of gas emissions that exists. If you are a woman of childbearing age, pay serious attention to the benzene impact of this. Stanford studies have come out, other studies have come out around emissions. A lot of the advocacy movement has moved to the larger appliances because it is probably going to be the first wave of what we can get universal adoption. But the health evidence is the strongest on gas stoves. And so, you know, it may be an alternative to go to an induction burner, but that shouldn't be what you have to do as a renter. So we have both legal services and people who work with or really experience that negotiating, helping owners get to a better place. So please contact me. I'll send you my information. We clearly want people to take advantage of the rebates and the tax credits that are happening, but there are also grant programs to help with this and also build the awareness around this. But people should take this seriously. No one wants to give up their gas stove. I used to live in Paris, right? I learned to cook when I was a kid living in Paris. Learned to cook on flames. I've given up all the gas in my house after reading the health studies.
Next question.
Hi, this is for Ruth Ann. I really like the way the Green and Healthy Homes program wraps everything into one, health and safety concerns, energy efficiency. I took a quick look at your website, and it shows that you serve Baltimore, but do you serve other areas in Maryland?
So we are going to be seeking, with support from the state, a $20 million community change grant so that we can serve Western Maryland, places like Frederick, Washington County, as well as the Eastern Shore. We currently don't have as much funding to do it, although we were just in Washington County the other day with the Department of Health. We have an incredible health secretary in Laura Herrera Scott who understands that climate is health and is really working with us on a lot of these efforts as well. But we're looking to expand that. We do it on a case-by-case basis by need, but we don't have a constant presence here today.
And then just as a follow-up, when you do work in a community, do you collaborate with existing programs?
Yep. Yeah, so our whole approach is to come from underneath and lift what exists first, right? Train the organizations who can do the work. We're not looking to do it all, right? GHHI is never going to solve everybody's issues. I refer to us as polar bears. We jump in, we break the ice so others can swim, right? And we want to lift communities. So what we're doing in Detroit with the Detroit Home Repair Program is training 20 community development organizations on how they can create healthier, more climate-friendly housing in Detroit, right? We've brought in the health systems. We've brought in big foundations like Ford and Gilbert, the guy who owns Rocket Mortgage and Quicken Loans. And we've aligned that with city and state government, right? So we have a huge project going there. But our approach is a collaborative approach. One of the reasons we were chosen to run, and anybody who's in any community effort, please pay attention. Starting in April, we will be giving out $350,000, $250,000 grants to build capacity around issues of climate equity, environmental justice, and health. And the reason that I believe we were chosen to lead the $50 million grant program for Region 3, which includes Virginia, West Virginia, DC, Maryland, Pennsylvania, is because we're an organization that started with one person and $17,000. We understand what it means to grow an organization up, the experience of that, and not wanting everybody else to come in and take away the work that we know we can do better because we know our communities. You all know your community better than I ever will, or anybody, you know, anybody from outside. And so we want to build in the fabric of what exists and build up, right, from that fabric, and then where there's a gap, try to help fill that gap strategically and strengthen.
That's great. I mean, we have some great programs in Frederick County,
do.
but it's all limited by, you know, funding. And so
Well, I think it's
excited to hear what you do.
Yeah, it's strategy. You know, you got to do an asset and gap analysis of what you have existing, figure out the strategy around that. It's both the authenticity of the work that will lead the funding, but we're happy to talk to folks about the community change grant and how we want to envision that for the state, not right, because we're doing a lot in Baltimore. We've raised $40 million in Baltimore to do the whole house approach.
That's
other parts of the
great.
state
That's
that need it.
great. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Hi. First, thank you for putting on this summit and for being here to help educate all of us. It's probably an overused phrase, but I'm really impressed with the thought that it does take a village to get to the end game here. And I never thought I'd want to give up my gas stove, but you guys are convincing me. So, but my specific question is on the Rewiring America credits, and this is maybe showing my ignorance. Are the credits available only in instances where you rewire something, so you change from gas to electric? Or is it, you know, I did replace a dryer this year, but I already had an electric dryer. It wasn't high efficiency, now it is, or the washer is, whatever. Are they available only when you change fuel sources?
No. So, so the short answer is no. The longer answer is it really depends. So the examples that I gave out, those are just examples of the many things that fall under the tax credits and the tax rebates. Ultimately, it comes down to if you're getting like if you just purchase a dryer or a washer and it's a high efficiency one, it will still qualify under that tax credit. So that is something when you're preparing your taxes that you would. Usually, I believe the information is you just submit the serial number of that washer under 25C or 25D, and you should be able to get that rebate. But it's not necessarily just switching from gas to electric. It's really just for a lot of electrification upgrades. Like, for example, if you want to get a more high efficient door that is better insulated and keeps the cool air in during the summers and warm air in during the winters, that falls under a tax credit. So the Rewiring America the website breaks it down into much more specifics when you create your plan on it in terms of what exactly the credits and the rebates provide and cover. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And just to be clear, Rewiring America is a nonprofit that's advocating for people to use these credits. So the rewiring word there is just the name of the organization that's doing the calculator. So don't think about it, that rewiring isn't required.
Right, and the credits are it will be on the IRS federal tax when you're doing your tax return. It will be line 25C and 25D that you'll be looking at.
Okay, we have time. We're running out of time here, so let's get 2 more questions in.
Oh dear. Well, I had 3, one for each of you, short, but actually that was part, Ernesto, if you're building brand new and you're buying high efficiency stuff, that still counts. Yeah, okay.
That was a yes.
Yeah, sorry. Ruth Ann, do any of the GHAI initiatives or projects include landscaping, because trees provide incredible shade. They can cut way down on energy usage if they are properly sited.
Our project in Memphis, our project in Mississippi, and our project in Trenton, New Jersey do. Baltimore doesn't. There's not a lot of landscaping to do in some of our projects there. And so a lot of that is site-based. We don't disagree with you on that, and we want to get people into some of their own community garden work and raised garden beds for lots of reasons, right? I'm happy to talk to you about it. We'd love to add it. You know, we're trying to get the hard stuff done. We go deep and big in housing on trying to get the big health issues done. I love that. Would love to expand that, and I agree with you.
That's sort of where my family's expertise is, so maybe we can talk later.
Yeah,
But
let's
I'm
talk.
just thinking, here in Maryland, it fits right in with the 5 Million Tree Initiative, so. And Joel, finally, sorry, last but not least, is there any possibility of looking at the vacant large buildings that you were talking about in terms of resilience hubs that we were talking about yesterday?
Resilience hubs, I've not been a part of any of those conversations, but it seems like a sensible marriage that this building stock should be repurposed, if not for resilience hubs, into some sort of affordable housing.
Yeah, and if I'm a building owner who doesn't have the money myself to do something useful with a standing vacant building, and we need them, we need resilience hubs.
Well, and if we can't find, through our efforts, if we can't find a useful way to repurpose these buildings, they will just sit there and slowly crumble. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And our last question.
Yeah, thank you for focusing on housing that is both sustainable and healthy for community. So one mention was done about the tree, and obviously there's much more that needs to happen around the housing, because you're not staying in the house 24/7, even though you stay there for the greatest part. You have to have jobs, you have to move to get places where you need to be, you need to buy things, etc. But staying on the houses itself, there's two things that, at least from a perspective of a non-American, it's mind-boggling how, you know, they are not focused on. One is multi-level building, multi-level structures is stairs, and the second are windows. So in here, somehow society has evolved in not having usable windows in residences and in other type of buildings, which, you know, has been made, I hope, painfully clear that ventilation, natural ventilation is necessary. By the last, 3 or 4 years, I think that finally people have, to some extent, understood that. And the other one is stairs. I mean, it's a, 5,000-year-old invention that never stopped working. So obviously, you do have people that have mobility issue, but most of us can definitely just go up and down buildings that way, rather than use energy and complexity with elevators. So could you comment on this?
I'll comment on the windows for sure. Everybody in the room, please join me. I'm trying to convince the Department of Energy that every time we do a weatherization grant, they should replace windows. There's a saving ratio that windows fall slightly short. When you replace a window, you improve indoor air quality in so many other ways. For asthma, it's the #1 source for lead poisoning, is old windows. But you also add to the other aspects of energy efficiency, the direct benefit, and what we refer to as non-energy benefits puts it as the highest ROI of what can be done in a house, right? And for building owners, people who are doing retrofits, rehabs, et cetera, the windows, right, are so critical in that. So we're trying to change that. We're probably close. So I agree with you on the windows. On the multiple structure, it's easier in many ways to build a sort of a more efficient environment in multifamily housing than in single sometimes to do that. But we do a lot of work for older adults. It's half of our portfolio is older adults. So those mobility issues are critical to us and how we build that for lots of reasons of saving people over time from having to get their whole life wiped out by assisted living. So we're really interested in how do we build and rehab structures that people can go cradle to grave in.
So that's going to end our conversation. We're out of time. The good news is, if you're interested in this topic, is one of our breakout sessions is going to cover this. We'll have this panel plus one other person. So, and I think someone's going to talk about where those sessions are after lunch. And thank you for attending.
Thank you all.
Thank you.